One of the questions that I get asked the most is what I recommend to keep knives sharp. My personal favorite method is using a leather strop, so today I thought I'd show you how to make your own and then how to use it for knife sharpening. The nice thing about leather strops is that they're super inexpensive and simple to make, and there's also a wide variety of polishing compounds that you can load the leather with, and you can play around with the different types of edges that they give. Here are a few of the strops that I made myself that I like to use. This one has some black compound on it, then this one has some green chromium oxide, and then this little one's a nice small one that I have loaded with some diamond spray. Here are the materials that I'm going to be using to make the leather strop. The first is this piece of scrap wood that I got from a pallet, and we're just going to put the leather onto that. Then I have this nice piece of 8-ounce vegetable tanned leather, and I'll leave a link in the description of where I got that. Then we have any type of glue pretty much. I'm going to use this epoxy, but you could also use something like wood glue. And then the last thing we're going to do is need some type of polishing compound. And my personal favorite is this 1 micron diamond spray, but you could also use something like that chromium oxide that I showed earlier or some black stropping compound. First thing that I'm going to do is trace out the leather that I need. So I'm just going to put the piece of wood onto it and then trace it with a pencil. Now I'm just going to go ahead and cut it out with my trusty Spyderco Paramilitary 2. It can be pretty tough to get through the leather, so I often have to make a couple of passes through it to cut all the way through. The leather has two sides. The first is this top side, which has a really nice smooth surface to strop on. And then this is the bottom side that has a really rough surface. So when I go to glue my leather to the wood, I always like to glue the rough surface down onto the wood so that I have the nice smooth surface to strop on. I always like to smear a little bit of the epoxy onto the wood and then also some on the leather just to make sure that I have really good sticking on both surfaces. Then I just put the leather on top of the wood and then take some clamps and clamp it down. One thing that's important to do at this stage is wipe off any glue that might be on the surface of the leather from your fingers, because if that dries on there, then it's going to leave a really hard and imperfect surface on the leather. I also like to press down on the leather so that it squeezes out any of the air bubbles and leaves you a better glue up. The glue is all dried up, and at this point you could just call it a day and put on your polishing compound, but since I like my tools to be all pretty, I'm going to go ahead and clean up the dried glue and smooth out the wood. I'm doing all of my smoothing out on my belt sander because I'm used to working with it and it's nice and fast, but if you just have something like sandpaper, that'll work just fine too. I always like to bevel the corners of the wood just because it makes it a little more comfortable to hold and it also looks nice. If you're wanting to get really fancy, you can get a custom wood brand with your logo or name on it, just so you have a little bit more extra customization to your strop. Now I'm just going to put a light coating of mineral oil on the wood. Now that the strop's looking all nice and pretty, it's time to apply the compound. When you're using something like the black stropping compound or chromium oxide, you can simply just use it like a crayon and rub it on the leather like this. But when you're using the diamond spray, I like to shake it up and then take off the cap, which is always important, and then hold it around a foot away from the strop and just give it a couple light spritzes. And then once you have an even coating, you can just rub it around with your finger and then you should be good to go. With your new strop in hand, it's time to learn how to use it for knife sharpening. The general concept of stropping is that under normal use, a knife edge will tend to have little deformations in it, and become misaligned, but what stropping does is put all those back into line and reform the nice sharp apex of the edge. One advantage of using a strop to keep your knife sharp is that it extends the life of your knife. When you do knife sharpening with something like a water stone or a belt grinder, you remove a lot of the material from the knife, and that really cuts down on the life of your knife. But when you're stropping, you're really not removing any material, and that means you're losing less of the steel from the edge. The one disadvantage of a strop is that it's not necessarily the best for restoring a really dull edge, but in my opinion, there's no better tool to keep a sharp knife sharp. The first step in stropping well is to find the right angle at which you want to strop at, and I like to do that by laying the knife flat onto the side of the strop and then slowly moving it forward while lifting up the spine of the knife until the edge catches, and then that's the angle that you want to strop at. Usually the angle ends up being between 15 or 20 degrees, and then I just place the tip of the knife down on the strop and slowly move it backwards so that it doesn't cut into the strop, and then use light pressure and then just alternate between the sides. And if all goes well, you should end up with a sharp knife. Thanks for watching, and I hope this video inspires some of you to make your own strop and start using it for knife sharpening. If you do, please send me a message and let me know how it goes, and maybe even send me a picture of how your strop turned out. Let me know if you have any questions, and stay sharp.